So thank you for that. Now let's talk. This week is rather personal for me. I've never had so much trouble actually completing the presentation. It's taken me 8 days until 3 o'clock every morning. But I think it's very personal. I want to sort of walk through. And the primary mission here is this notion that the art market really needs a moonshot. And I'm going to break it down in a couple things. I have a theater background, so of course I have to do it in 3 acts. I won't do interpretive dance, but I don't really take this in an offensive way. I take it personally because I have a great passion for this industry. I'm a supply chain guy by background, but art has always been my passion. So why are we constantly failing to grow this market? Sort of act one we go through. Act two is how do we fix the problems we identify, and then act three is how do we get it done? And you're probably going to have a sense of why. But I want to start at the beginning, because this is an inspirational moment, for me when I look at this notion of a moonshot. And most people know this, or they know it from SNL. For the first part that says, we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. I don't have a great New England accent to make it sound funnier. But what most people don't realize is this was 1962. It was actually 1969, July 16th, that we landed on the moon. So that was 7 years later. Actually, not even 7 years later. It was an incredible achievement. So, and I'm sorry I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to bash the title of this conference. And I expect to be the first, not the third or fourth person. But 2050, when I first heard about this, but this was science fiction for me. And, I am actually a science fiction buff, whether it be Arthur C. Clarke, or Asimov, or others. So, from one standpoint, it's great to think because anything is possible. When you're talking about science fiction, anything could be there. But I think what we get from science fiction is this notion, if you predict it, the next generation will actually think it's possible. And for anybody that was a Star Trek fan back in the 60s or the 70s, the phones we used were predicted. Everything we do now in the tech field was predicted in the future. So I think if we can come up with a map of where we want to go, we can actually achieve it. So, my team did this to me, and I don't know why they did. But my problem with 2050 was a couple things. One is when we talk about investment, I have yet to find an investor that thinks beyond 3 to 5 years for their own exit. So the notion that we're going anything beyond 5 years is insane in the technical field. We can think maybe 10 years in advance, but those are, dreamers from that standpoint. Our investors are long gone. And the second one is I'm going to be 80 years old, and I want to do stuff before then. That can be my legacy, but I have some achievements before I actually retire. So one of my biggest problems that we have out here, and it's conferences like this I love, so once again, I'm not bashing it, but usually they don't have a clear objective of where you're trying to go. What are the actual goals here? So I think you have to challenge yourself in that way. How much of the art market grow? I have yet to hear anybody say, give a number. I give a number every single day, and I could be wrong, but I don't care. I'm aiming for something. And who should own art and how much? Well, everybody should. We should challenge people about why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we standing in front and pushing this forward? And the last one, this is somewhat controversial. People say, should it be a legitimate asset class? Or maybe that's too commercial. Bullshit, it should. It should be, and it can be everything. We don't have to limit ourselves in how we look at it. If I thought there were limits, I would not come out of another place to come here. There we go. So let's go to Act 1. Why do we keep failing? I don't need to read this to you. I can, caveat emptor. Any industry that's what people think about when they first think about art, you are never going to grow. You're never going to succeed because people will not come join you. You have to protect your customer. You have to find ways to get away with it. And I like to do this. Anybody that's heard me speak before, you've probably heard a lot of these things, but I'm going to still repeat myself because I've been told you have to repeat at least 3 times for people to pay attention. So there are many markets that have had exactly the same problems that we see in the art market. And we need to look at those markets and solve them, and they're usually solved through innovation. Sometimes tech, sometimes low tech, but they're always solved. So, you can tell from my accent, I'm actually from Canada originally, but I have an American accent now because I've been there for way too long. But when we look at things, used cars, classic cars were really changed by a company called Carfax. And nobody who buys a used car would even think about doing it unless you knew about the history of that car, the provenance, if you will. They changed everything and made what was the butt of every joke in the 1970s and early 80s actually one of the biggest markets out there. Two, Bloomberg, most of you have heard about it, but they actually put real-time data for foreign exchanges, in the 1980s, and it was unheard of. It changed the entire market, how it grew and where it went. That's all about data. Real estate, the younger people actually know what Zillow is, some of the other ones they may not know, but this was an opaque market that nobody really had a way to get into, and it was completely transformed, for better or for worse, the way real estate, especially non-commercial real estate, is bought. And the last one, this is an older story. I live in Carlsbad, California. The GIA is 4 miles from my house. I didn't know that. But this was actually started in the 1930s. And at the time, diamonds and gems, there were no standards. There were no set prices. People didn't know what to do. And from that time forward, they came up with this crazy notion of the 4 C's. If anybody's bought a diamond, you know what the 4 C's are. And if they ever received one, you know what they are too, so you can criticize what was bought for you. But the GIA changed it, and it was just about standards. So this is boring stuff, except for people like me. This is how you fundamentally move things forward. So this is, you can see how I feel about some things, but healthy markets are really like healthy democracies. And when we think about them, there are really sort of 4 principles we have to think about a healthy market. In this one, popular governance, equality, liberty, justice. And I think we have to admit to ourselves when we look at, the art market, it is like a faltering democracy. We are not good. We are deficient, as I put up here, in most of these categories. But they're fixable. So let's talk about Act 2. I actually know I'm good. How do we fix these problems? So when Andrew started talking first, I thought I'm in trouble because he's going to say everything that's in my speech when he talked about Moore's Law. But so I'm going to go one step further. His first name was Gordon Moore, and he was at Intel, and he came up with this in 1965. So he's learned something here. And he originally thought it was every year you were going to, he was thinking in circuits, but it was basically doubling computing power every year, going forward. And they thought that would end. And then they said, well, maybe it's not 1 year, it's 2 years. So in 1975, I think they did a new white paper every 2 years. And I thought, it's going to settle down to every 5 years. Well, it did. So it keeps going. The crazy thing about it as a technologist, given this, why the hell is the art world not benefiting from any of this? They have not. We need to find a way to that. So another thing, I'm going to take credit away. My good friend Elon Musk likes to talk about first principles as if he came up with first principles. He didn't. Right. This is, all the way back to the Greeks here. This is Aristotelian. But I think when we look at the art market, we have to break it down. And I've broken it down into 6 parts. I don't know why I like number 6. I just never get to 7. But when we look at the problems, I broke it down and said, look, we don't have data standards, or at least, general standards we can agree to. We don't really have a code of ethics. Well, that's a problem. And I love the last speech. We're talking about ethics. We should be talking about the front end, not trying to fix things afterwards. Transparency is a problem. And transparency doesn't mean everybody knows everything. Transparency is about knowing what's going on. It's about, basically fixing symmetry of data. Asymmetry of data, I can do all sorts of lectures on the history of economics, but, basically if the buyers and sellers don't know the same thing and they don't trust each other, you end up with markets that's a race to the bottom. This notion of title, how are we in a market that doesn't actually manage title properly? This is insane. We must find a way to fix that. And the last is recourse. This is, the notion that people actually, consumers could be protected, that there is some way of holding people accountable. The amount of times I've found people that have been arrested, have gone to jail, that pop up 3 years later in the news selling stuff again. I do not understand how this happens. It's insane. So I've broken it down in these 6 areas. Take a picture if you want. I don't have enough time to talk it all through. But I like to put them in terms so people can understand, whether it be truth or governance or access. These are very important themes that will come back. Oh, you want to take a picture? Take a picture. Okay. And put QR codes. So in May, I think it was, I was in New York, and I got some flack for calling it I think it was the 6 worrying technologies that will completely transform the art world. It's pure clickbait. But the whole idea here was, the technology already exists. We don't have to invent the base. It's almost like the AI models. We're not inventing AI, we're finding ways to apply it. We're finding ways to use it. And whether it be pulling it from other industries or sort of looking here, we put together a model, and you'll all beat it up because, I took that whole 4 C's and said, why don't we call them the 8 A's of art? Maybe we can find a way to organize data. And I throw on here some of the technologies that we talked about the last time, whether it be AI or cryptography or blockchain or IoT, 5G, and RFID. That's what I talked about. You can look online and see that fun speech I gave. But the notion is it's already here. So the problem isn't about the technology. It's not about the structure. There's something else going on. So, clearly, visual cues here, like, are we going extinct? What's the problem? Why are we not catching up as an industry? Where do we look? And, I think that's a sunset, but, here's my theory. The art industry, he's quite dreamy, but he's a historian, right? And historians tend to look in the past, they don't look forward. Anytime Indiana Jones shows up, I feel good about my presentation. So thank you, I'm done. But one of the things we learned in tech, and I came from another industry and came into this one, is the people that are usually the fastest to adopt technology are criminals. And there's another industry. Anybody know what the other industry is? It's the porn industry. So porn is really good at adopting technology very quickly. You don't have to look there to find out what they're doing, but that's always a good indicator of like how to take advantage of it. So, the second thing you have to look is, number two is if you're not embracing technology, in essence, the criminals are ahead of you, you're going to be taken advantage of. You're not protecting your customers. So why would people want to play? And, and the last thing here, and we have to see this in the art world, the only people that can afford it if you're not investing in it is rich people. So basically only the people at the very top can afford to protect themselves. This is why you're never growing. So there's a notion here, you can use a different word. I like to use the word utilities, whether it be a public utility, public good companies. There's a lot of us out there that are trying to build, what amounts to infrastructure. And I think if you don't invest in this fundamental infrastructure that all these other industries have, you're never going to grow. Here we go. So I've given a couple ideas of utilities. Some companies already exist trying to do this. Some perhaps are new. But this notion of whether it be tokenization companies for ID or title registries or forensic labs, passports or customs, rare documents, KYC, escrow, these sorts of things should exist and really exist across the board. The other thing here that they're not necessarily companies, but it was great the last speech we talked about this notion of governance. And I think we can all agree it's self-regulation. We're going across so many different countries, so many places, but it really isn't any sense of governance here. We don't even have standard contracts, which drives me insane. When you look at, whether it be identification, APIs, reports, once again, they're not the same. They're not consistent. It's very hard to operate in this industry when there aren't consistencies. Ethics. I think this is why the humanities have to come back, because when you're working in the tech world, they have no idea what you're talking about. And the notion we're trying to play catch up because they're behaving like criminals, like there are no rules. We have to lead with it. We have to set up guidelines. We have to make a way so there are actual guardrails to not have to fix it, but solve the problems before they happen. I know it sounds a bit preachy, so I'll get funny again. So Act 3. So Act 3 is like, how do we get this done? And, for me, I try to explain to people how it feels to be a technologist in the art world. And this is how it feels. And they say, now build a high-speed rail. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? It's Roman ruins. I cannot do this. We have to find a way to put better infrastructure in to make this possible. So what makes it hard? I feel like I'm bashing everybody here, but infrastructure is not sexy. I dress up, I usually wear black and jeans, but I dressed up for you to try and make it look sexier here. But we're geeks and nerds, right? Like we love this stuff. We think it's really cool, but it's not that exciting for the rest of the industry. And the other problem that runs into is we have a long arc, often beyond the 3 to 5 years, because we're thinking about, infrastructure takes time to build. You have to think it out. It requires significant investment. And the last thing here is ROI on a lot of this is not exponential. There may be a hockey stick as you get more adoption, but it's not exponential. It basically grows as the market grows, but it's essential. We have to think about this differently. So, and the last one you all know, it's kind of like the IT joke here, but it's like nobody notices when it works. They only get crazy nuts when it doesn't work. And this is another thing we have to think about. Like you have to invest in it so it actually works. And I can guarantee, and I know there's economists here, and I've talked to before, there's never been a market that has grown to scale without this kind of infrastructure. It just doesn't happen. Okay, so why is a moonshot important? I think there are 3 points here. There's probably more to it than this, but this notion, number one, is capital. If we're going to do something that's seemingly impossible in a short period of time, remember, I think it should be, let's say 2030, maybe 2035, we need capital. And we need it to come from somewhere. Number 2, we need common goals. We need to agree where we're going. This notion that we all have to invent something differently, it's insane. We need to go together. We don't have to compete all the time. And that's number 3. There is so much to grow into. Collaboration is key. And I was amazed when I looked at this industry that nobody was really collaborating it the way I thought they should. Once again, on the supply chain side of many companies, we all got along. We were friends. We would go to conferences. We would drink together. We dreamed up solutions because we were not strategic to the companies. We were just core. And that's how we have to think about a lot of this industry. There's a lot of just core. We can all benefit from it, so we have to work together. So I'm going to go back to number 1. And this was I could read it, it's too long. But this was an asset administrator who'd been there for 42 years. And he basically broke it down. It's money, it's money, it's money. And if you're counting on politicians, they'll back away and not get to your money. So the key thing is the engineering is not the problem. Solving the problems that seem impossible, that's not the problem. The problem is the commitment to the money to get where you want to go. So who's going to pay for it? And I think it's going to come probably in 3 waves. But number 1, the insiders in the industry, whether it be insurance companies or as banks or big galleries or dealers, they need to invest in their own future. Otherwise, there won't be one. And they don't have to invest individually because, once again, this isn't necessarily strategic, right? This is a general investment in the overall infrastructure of the industry. So when we look at that, whether it be consortiums or whether it be investment funds or private ventures, there's a way to do this, but they have to be committing in that way. And the thing that goes hand in hand with this, and I know this because of the investors I've talked to, is that outsiders, when they see an industry committed to where they're going and define what the goals are, will participate because they know they're going to be successful. There is money. There are users. Instead, we run around trying to justify doing the most obvious thing for an industry, and people say, will they buy it? Are you kidding me? Of course they should buy it, but we need to have them come out and say it and commit to it. So this is where I get bold, and I'm going to get even bolder by the end. But I think you just have to go just like JFK did back in 1962 and say, why isn't by 2030 we're a $100 billion mark? We're somewhere between 50 and 70 now. Why not 100? I don't see any reason why we couldn't get there, so we should go. And second, why not double it again? And I'm going to give you Moore's Law. Turns out they thought it would be every 5 years after it was 2 years. So 5 years, let's double it again. Is there a reason why we shouldn't? And I don't think there is. If you look at the turnover of the market, you assume 3 trillion assets, you're at 1.8% turnover. There's no reason you couldn't aim towards things. So let's do it. Right. Second thing, who should own art? How much? 10 to 15%. Fight me. I think it's a logical number. Put it out there. We've seen Deloitte say anywhere from 8 to 12 or maybe as far as 15. If we're doing our job, this is a reasonable number. Put it out there. That's our goal. Number 2, get it shifted from an asset class. It's always this sort of notion, alternative, and maybe, and is it really a true, legitimate asset class? Of course it is. It should be a common asset class. It's the one that's been around for the longest ever. Let's agree to that and move it forward. And the last thing is, and I think this is reasonable, and there are tools to make this possible, it's how do you make this liquid as real estate? That's not that much of a stretch. So how do we get there? Okay, so, thank you from the last panel. Collaboration. That was number 3 out here. So number 1, technology has to be fully integrated because none of you who are non-technologists want to talk to your IT department because they're annoying. And having to do a new integration every single time, even I as a technologist don't want to do it. So you have to come up with standards to make it easy. Standards, how about that? If we actually had standards and we followed them, it makes it even easier, down to the idea that an item, a work of art, has a standard way of communicating. There's a company or a group called AIS that's represented here. It's a way to do literally identification for art. This should have existed decades ago. 3, we need to work towards a common goal. We're spending a disproportionate amount of time on marketing when we should just be working on developing the products that everybody needs. Competition should never be toxic. You will always find toxic companies. They must be pushed out of the way. They are a race to the bottom. They will never move us in the right direction. You have to stop accepting them because they're low bidding it. Stop. And I think this is one thing, and I apologize to Andrew at the beginning. I think there's a risk for infrastructure companies having a conflict of interest. This notion that you're owning the data and you're also participating in the buy-sell is dangerous. It's a problem. There's enough money to be made for the infrastructure companies to not participate in it because somebody has to have trusted data. And if you're going to trust our data, we can't be competing with you on the buy-sell side. So I think the value-added services have to think about it that way, and then all the marketplaces have to think it That's how markets work properly. The S&P is not doing the buy-sell, they're actually just managing all the transactions. Think about it. And the last thing here, this is just a bunch of people I'm working with. This is not to be exclusive, but we just got together a bunch of companies. We were working together loosely, and we just gave ourselves a quick name and a logo here, the Art Market Solutions Group. Don't care. But we have a whole bunch of tables out there. It's like, why don't we work together and talk together and hand clients back and forth to each other and move things forward? Annika's looking at me. It's like, how am I up there? I don't even know the name of this thing because we're moving fast and we're breaking stuff. So the last thing I just want to think, and I know I'm early in the bit here, but when we talk about a conference, like we can beat up the name, we can think about things, but I really want to think about the legacy of this. And from a technology, a lot of people are sort of technology for technology's sake, sort of like I'm an AI. It's like, but what's problem are you solving? I think we're solving real problems, so I think we need to move away. That's not why we're doing this. Is it to grow the art market? Yeah, but I think that's sort of a benefit of where we're going. And the last one, of course, I've loaded this deck, apologies, but, I think it's collaborating to make the art market worthy of art, its creators and its patrons. And I try and be more inclusive in that because often, artists get left off this, they're on panels, but we sort of forget about them. But I think when you think about it holistically, the whole market moves, and that's how it gets bigger. So, you can read along with me, I know JFK, but when I thought about this, and if you want to do a moonshot, I don't know who can give the speech, they can give their own one. But I was thinking about this last night, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could come up and say, maybe we chant it later or something? But the idea is, and I was ripping up JFK at the beginning. I just said, we'll make the fine art the next great asset class by 2035. There, I chose the date, and not because it's easy, because it's hard. And I said, we'll elevate art, something we love, to the highest standards. And I think that's really important. Make the art market represent our values, to be shared and appreciated by all humanity. Make it accessible to all people, and stand up for the creators, historians, the professionals, and experts who make this industry and market so incredible. And we'll also protect the industry from the corrupting influences that try to undermine the values of the very art and culture we so cherish.